I could go on and on and on to talk about cakes because those are one of my favorite desserts that I could have during any time of the day, and also I could replace a whole meal with a cake. Well, that was probably the reason why I have been struggling with my weight loss journey ever since I remember. Having been on a low carb lifestyle for a pretty decent amount of time, I felt it difficult to come over the requirement of having a slice of cake at least once a week. Now, this recipe of a low carb, or let's call it a ketogenic diet compatible cake, is a hit amongst the low carb dieters. Now, this birthday cake was baked for one of my loved ones' birthday recently, and it was a definite hit even with my 6-year-old daughter. So I can guarantee you that if you have friends and family who are not on a low carb diet, they may as well come back and ask you for the recipe. So I hope you enjoy it. It's very simple and pretty straightforward, and I can assure you one more thing, that you really do not require any cake baking experience or skills in order to do this, because I don't have any of those skills when I did this myself. It is definitely a pleasure to your taste buds. Enjoy. So first things first, what you need is a measuring scale. What I have got here is a very simple kitchen scale that gives you measurements in 4 metric units. I prefer my measurements in grams, and it just makes it so much more easier for me. So to start with, I add on my primary ingredient for the cake, which is coconut flour, and that's about 55 grams of coconut flour. Now you got to be careful if you're making a low carb version of this, because some of the coconut flours come with added sugar, so please be careful when you do purchase them from your local store. Following this, I go ahead and add 50 grams of powdered sweetener. Now you could have a couple of options like monk fruit or stevia. What I use here is granulated erythritol. This is followed by about 1 tablespoon of baking powder, following which I give all of my dry ingredients a really good mix so that they're integrated very well. At this point, we go ahead and add our wet ingredients. So I've taken my egg tray from the refrigerator. Now, some of the recipes do recommend having your eggs at room temperature, but for me it really worked quite all right without room temperature eggs. So I go ahead here and add about 5 whole medium-sized eggs into this mixture, and it might look like a lot of eggs for some of us, but believe me, it's not going to taste eggy at all. Following this, I go ahead and add 225 grams of oil. Now, to be very honest, what I strongly recommend here is coconut oil in order to get the proper cakey texture. What I have added here is avocado oil, and this was simply because I ran out of coconut oil and I couldn't find any in my local store. And also, thankfully, me and my family do enjoy the flavor of avocado oil. Following this, I go ahead and get 25 grams of almond flour as well into this mixture, because almond flour gives the cake a very crumbly yet stable texture. And then I add a tablespoon of lemon juice before I quickly clear up my table and get my hand mixer out and give them all a really good whisk in order to form a lovely cake batter. Now, you could do this with your regular hand whisk as well, but I have used my electric whisk just to make it a little bit more better for the purpose of my video. So now that's all very well whiskified, it's time for us to transfer that batter into our cake tray. Before that, I'd like to put a sheet of parchment paper. Now, I do not know an easier way to do this, so I get my very traditional pencil outside, draw a circle and a scissor to cut off parchment paper at the size of my cake tin. Now, if you do know a simpler way of doing this, please let me have it in the comment section below. It's going to help me immensely. And after that, I'm going to quickly grease my tray with either a bit of a baking spray or just plain butter or oil before I stick in the parchment paper. I also grease the sides of my cake tray so that I'm not going to struggle once the cake is ready to be pulled out. Gently pour the batter into the cake tin, and you would notice the consistency of the batter is quite thick, which means there's also a possibility of leaving a lot of bubbles. Now you could tap it around a little bit on your table to release as many bubbles as possible. You could use your spatula to clear them, or also you could use metal skewer or a fork or the back of a fork like I'm doing here to draw a couple of lines and remove those bubbles. They go into the oven at 170 degrees Celsius for about 25 minutes. The temperature and the time will vary according to the power of your oven, so please be mindful about that. So while the cake bakes in the oven, we go ahead and do our buttercream frosting, and for this I use 220 grams of butter in room temperature. Now you definitely need this in room temperature because you are going to quickly use your electric whisk and whiskify them to get a nice and creamy texture. This is going to be a little bit time consuming, at least it was for me. It could be because I am quite impatient, but you really need the creamy white texture for butter as you do this. So also make sure that you scrape down your bowl quite often as you whiskify your butter. So now that the butter is nice and soft and creamy in texture, I go ahead and add 100 grams of fresh double cream into it. I love the taste of whipped double cream, and adding this into my butter frosting is only going to make it a little bit more creamy and sweet. Now at this point I go ahead and sweeten my buttercream frosting completely sugar-free, and I use here a few grams of powdered erythritol. Now you really do not want granulated sweetener in here, and that's because you do not want a sandy taste or texture. You know your buttercream frosting is ready when you get hard peaks on your whisk, something like this. I'm going to pop them into the fridge until required. My little girl gets absolutely fascinated with anything to do with strawberries, so I've decided to add a couple of fresh strawberries as well onto my cake, also because of the fact that strawberries give a very natural flavor and sweetness as well as beauty to the cakes that we bake. So I go ahead here and chop some large red ripe strawberries so that I can add them into my buttercream frosting. Now, did you know that strawberries are the only fruit that falls in the classification of berries which are keto compatible? So basically, if you're on a low carb diet, you're not allowed of any fruits except for berries, and luckily strawberries are one among them. So it's past 25 minutes now, and I've pulled my cake out, and this is what it looks like. I think it looks absolutely amazing. I got to leave it on my wire rack for a little while until it cools down. Please make sure you do not work on your cake until it has completely cooled down, unless you risk crumbling and breaking those beautiful bakes. I would like to chop through the cake and have a double layered cake so that I could frost in between. So I'm going to go ahead and use a regular chef's knife because I do not have a cake's knife, as I am not a very good baker. So I try and cut two equal slices, as you can see. Now this for me was a proper task, as I'm not used to doing it, and I was quite worried that I would end up having either two cake sections with different thickness or crumble up an entire piece. But thankfully it has come out quite well, as the cake was quite stable and I was able to pull this out and divide them into two. Next, I go ahead and get ready to frost my cake, but at this point I've also placed my cake in the refrigerator for a little while so that it hardens very well. And the last thing you want to do is add your frosting into really warm cake, because you risk melting those frosting away. So I'm going to be really patient here and leave my cake to cool down pretty well before I load my frosting. Now, my lack of experience for frosting a cake is clearly evident with this video, but anyhow, at the end of the day, all I wanted was a cake to bake, and it had to be low carb and keto friendly, and at the same time it should be able to serve the purpose of singing a birthday song for a loved one. So following this, I try and create a border around my cake, and this is because I'd like to add my strawberry crumbs in between. So I'm being really careful here because I'm quite slow and got to get used to holding the cone. And after I've got the border and the floor set, I am going to add the chopped up strawberries in between, and this is with the expectation that I'm going to get a beautiful layer as I cut a slice of my cake off later. So I add the chopped strawberries in there as much as I can, and I just love the contrast and colors in here of the buttercream frosting and the strawberries. Now once I've done that, I also go ahead and add a few dollops of buttercream frosting in between, just to make it a little bit more creamy and crumbly. Following this, I go ahead and add the second layer of cake on top. I've actually put it upside down so that I get a flat surface on the top to work with. You could easily guess our next steps here. Yes, we're going to add the remaining buttercream frosting and cover the cake as much as we can, starting from the top and then to the sides. Now, like I have been saying multiple times in this video, I am no expert in baking cake, so this is a very slow and a careful, cautious step for me. So I go ahead and spread the frosting as well as I could, and my whole idea was to cover the frosting with something else as much as I can, as they do look quite messy and I don't know how to get it really even. Now, is that because I'm doing a low carb, sugar-free version of the cake frosting? I'm not really sure. So if you do know about any other tips, please do let me know in the comment section below. And like I said, I use slices of strawberry to decorate my cake and give it a bit of a luxury look as much as I could. Now, even though strawberries are considered keto friendly because they fall into the berries family, we are being told that blackberries are probably one of the lowest carb content berries in them. So, you probably want to be a little bit more cautious when you have a slice of these if you are really conscious about your carb content. Now, having said that, you could also replace these strawberries with mixed berries of black and blueberry combination, and you could also get very creative and use different designs of blackberries and blueberries to design these cakes with some mint leaves. Or also you could go ahead and use some fresh flowers, which makes them have an absolutely gorgeous appearance. What I do here was use some dried rose petals, as you can see in here. I usually use these for my green tea, but it did get handy with my cake. I sprinkled them along the center, and just to add a little bit more excitement to it, I got some chocolate shaving as well on top of the cake. I hope you have enjoyed my simple recipe for a very basic low carb keto birthday cake. What I forgot to mention earlier was about the sides of the cake that I did decorate with some almond flakes. You could roast these almond flakes to give it a very crumbly texture, or you could leave it as it is. I've left it as it is and it looked absolutely gorgeous. If you do like the content of my channel, please like, share, and subscribe.